Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here in the museum. The object of this is to give you some idea of what a fellow like myself, having moved to Lindsay in 1965, what I've been doing during that period of time. I'm a pharmacist. I came to town to, the chap that brought me to town was getting older, and he needed a younger partner. So with that in mind, I started in at Quinn's Pharmacy in 1965. We had about 1,800 square feet total. Eventually, I ended up with something over 10,000 square feet on the same site, but just taking in the stores all around me in order to do it and make it into one big one with each, well, not each department, but many departments sectioned off. So if you're in the dispensary, you knew you weren't up in the aisle with jelly beans or something like that. Similarly with home health care, a separate store was used for that, for the simple reason if you're in that part of the store, you know what you're looking for, sort of thing. I graduated in pharmacy from the University of Toronto in 1960. I arrived in Lindsay in 1965 to become a junior partner to Stan Kennedy. Stan Kennedy bought the original pharmacy, Quinn's Pharmacy, from Mr. Tom Quinn. I was to become the junior partner, and we go from there. Even in my time, there's been vast changes in the role of the pharmacist. As a student, I got in on the tail end of compounding, but it was a dying art because the manufacturers had come in and everything was prepackaged or bottled up or what have you. You certainly had to know more about the drugs and their actions, their method of action, and for that matter, their interaction. But by far, the students today go into the depths of the various drugs compared to ourselves. We still had a fair bit of chemistry. In fact, one of the professors, I'll never forget this, he received the British Empire Medal. He was a chemistry professor for setting up ACAC shells to explode at, say, 10,000 feet when the enemy's planes were coming in view and all that sort of thing. So he always felt he wanted to give us a little shot at that kind of thing. So one day he says, we're going to pour some nitric acid on cotton, and that's how you make gun cotton. And so you come along, put it in a beaker, light it up, it goes poof. And that was our introduction to explosives in pharmacy. That's as close as we got, even though he was right in the business of it. Pharmacy had a lot more pure chemistry to it when I went through. Today, a lot of the course time taken up by what I say is chemistry has now been taken up with medical type subjects, like biochemistry, for example. It took me a while to get caught back up with knowing more and more about the interactions and so on. This was sort of a new thing to give us more and more and more things that we can do. For example, the latter thing is the injection of certain drugs or perhaps vaccines. But I want to take you back now to a very unusual era. It was Prohibition. And quite honestly, the pharmacist of the day, probably called druggist, was the legal bootlegger in the town. And by that I mean, the person could go to a physician during the week. This is just the way it seemed to work out. And they had a bad cough or something. And the doc would write them a prescription, and I'll use the Latin term here, Spiritus fermenti. I always love that word. And that means alcohol. Well, the doctor would give the patient a prescription for 16 ounces of Spiritus fermenti, which you would probably know as rye whiskey. This proceeded all through Prohibition, and the joke was at the time that it was $3 to see the doctor and $3 to pick up the Spiritus fermenti from the local pharmacy. It was just a little passing thing, and as they say, we became known as the legal bootlegger. As soon as Prohibition was over, that was over. We still used mostly brandy to make the odd thing, but even that's pretty well past now. It was very useful for cancer of the throat because the way the fumes went and all this sort of thing, it gave the patient some relief. But that product, I doubt very much that anybody writes for it anymore. Further to that, as I moved along, I kept taking over one store after the other around me and using them as departments rather than more of the same. I always wanted to have a separate dispensary so that when you had some sickness, you knew you were in the right place. The dispensary wasn't in with all the other products and distractions. When you were in the pharmacy, you knew it, and I built it that way. In fact, there's a little thing called the consultation room, and I put one of them in, and that was 20 years before it was mandated that you had to have one. 20 years. I always got a kick out of that we actually did something well ahead of the curve. And the store, we just seemed to come alive with more and more additions all the time until we reached something like 10,000 square feet. And at some point in time there, I sold the business to Shoppers Drug Mart. I carried on with Shoppers as their associate for some 14 years, and then I retired. So here I am today after that retirement. One of the initial things that got me into various other projects was becoming a member of Rotary, which I did in 1965. So currently I'm probably, I think I am, the oldest having the most amount of time in Rotary locally. The first major thing that happened to me was I became president of the club in 1972. I finished my year out in 73, and at that point in time, the project of an indoor pool raised its head. The kinsman, led by Ed Stevenson, came to Rotary with the thought, we would like to build an indoor pool. The thing is, no one club could do such a feat today. So Ed's offering was to the service clubs of the day, Lions and Kiwanis, to all of us join together and form a fundraising committee, firstly. So that's what we did. Well, it only took us about 5 years to finally get the thing built, but we did. It was quite a struggle because when the indoor pool was turned over to the town, it did not have any debt to it, which is almost unheard of. It had absolutely no debt. The key was turned over to the mayor with an additional $5,000 left in the kitty. All things paid. And that was probably the biggest project I ever worked on or had some involvement with. When it comes to other things that I have done, there's many of them also associated with Rotary. Such as helping out with the modernization of the armories, adding the unit to the library, the Academy Theater, and so on. So I've been involved at some juncture with all those projects. The other thing that's perhaps a little different about myself, and I just realized that the other day, that for some reason or other, I run around starting up clubs. And to that end, my first club that I started, right from scratch, was the Lindsay Lightning Bolts. And the pool, the indoor complex, the aquatorium, whichever word you want to use, is fine, but then you have to do something with it. So I thought, well, because I have a bit of an athletic background, what a indoor pool needs is a competitive swim team. So I got a charter for the team, got it going, and a few years down the trail, we put two of our swimmers on the Olympic team, and quite a few swimmers on university teams. Of course, like anything else, your kids grow up and you drift away from that activity. I probably worked on that for about 10 years, one way or another. And I found that was my first club to get going. After that, and there's a hiatus there of some years, I started to think that Rotary wanted to have an adjunct club, in other words, a seniors club, where they don't have to go out and do service anymore. Well, somewhere along the trail, Rotary assisted in the formation of something called Provost clubs. So indeed, I started the men's Provost club here in Lindsay, and subsequent to that, I signed the charter for the women's club and also the Fenland Falls Mixed Club. So that's 4 clubs now. And I have a political one called the Blue Club, which meets every Friday and has met for over 20 years. And we discuss politics of the day. Naturally, calling it the Blue Club, you can imagine what party we belong to, more or less. Perhaps the highlight of all this for me was to not only become a Citizen of the Year, but to have 2 other fine fellows along with me, namely Ed Stevenson and Don Warner. Ed was really the one, as mentioned previously, that got the pool going, and Don Warner was our chair of the building committee, who did an excellent job, and we benefit from his expertise both as a lawyer and as a builder, because he was very familiar with both occupations. Make it to be put in simple words, he got us all kinds of grant money we never even thought of by doing certain things that he knew of through construction. And so that became a highlight too. As we go down the trail, the 3 of us were made Citizens of the Year jointly. And that was kind of fun to see that happen. Thank you.